Sat a woman in an dress from the early 1900s. She held a parasol in her hands and stared straight at him. "You're late," she said in a cold but clear voice. "The train will be leaving soon." Sam froze. He wanted to say something, but at that very moment, somewhere in the distance, came the low rumble of an approaching train. The train that shouldn't exist. The sound grew louder, the rhythmic pounding of wheels against invisible tracks echoing through the empty station. Sam's heart began to race. He glanced over his shoulder at the entrance. It was still open, but the cold night air now carried the faint scent of smoke and coal, as if from an old steam engine. The woman in the vintage dress didn't move. She simply adjusted her parasol and looked at him with calm, almost bored eyes. Her voice was soft, yet it cut through the room like a blade. "If you're going aboard, you must have your ticket ready." Sam swallowed. There aren't any trains here. This station's been closed for years." At his words, something in her expression shifted. Her head tilted ever so slightly, and a small smile curved her lips. Not a warm smile, but one that felt like a warning. "You speak as though time moves only in one direction," she said. A gust of wind swept through the hall, scattering dust into the air. Somewhere beyond the far wall, Sam could swear he saw a beam of light moving, the kind of bright, golden beam a train's headlamp would cast. But there were no tracks there anymore. He took a cautious step toward her. "Who are you?" The woman stood, the hem of her dress swaying as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is the choice you're about to make. Stay here, and your life will be exactly as it has been. Step aboard, and everything changes." Her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. The sound of the train was deafening now. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a whistle blew, long and mournful. The woman extended her gloved hand toward him. "It's your stop, Mr. Harper." He froze. She knew his name. The edge of two worlds. Sam's pulse thundered in his ears. He glanced toward the door, wondering if he should just run back into the night. But the sound of the train was so real now. The heavy clanking of metal, the hiss of steam, the low hum of its massive engine. It was impossible to believe it wasn't there. The woman's hand was still extended toward him, her gloved fingers steady, her eyes fixed on him with an unblinking patience. Her presence seemed to bend the air around her. Sam could feel a faint vibration in the floorboards, like the ground itself knew something was approaching. "I don't understand," he said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay calm. "What train? There are no tracks here anymore." She stepped closer, and he caught a faint scent of lavender mixed with something metallic. "Tracks don't vanish, Mr. Harper. Not the real ones. They only shift. This station may be empty in your world, but it is still alive in another." Her words sent a cold shiver down his spine. "Another world?" he repeated. "Yes," she said simply. "Every station, every crossing, every line of steel ever laid down is part of a greater network. Some trains run only once in a lifetime, some only at night, and some take passengers to places they never return from." As she spoke, the light outside grew brighter. It began as a dim glow beyond the broken windows, but swelled into a blinding, golden-white beam that cut through the dust like a sword. Sam shielded his eyes. The whistle blew again, long, low, and full of something that felt almost like grief. Then he saw it. Through the darkness beyond the station, emerging from nowhere, came a massive steam locomotive. Its iron body gleamed despite its age, and its wheels churned as though they were cutting through both fog and time itself. The air around it rippled, distorting like heat waves on asphalt. The number on its front read 314, but the digits seemed to shift when he blinked, becoming 413, then 134. It slowed as it approached the empty platform, releasing a great hiss of steam that filled the hall. Sam coughed, waving his hand in front of his face. When the smoke cleared, he saw that the woman was already standing on the edge of the platform, her parasol now closed and held at her side. "The doors will not wait," she called over the roar of the engine. Sam looked at her, then at the open carriage doors. Inside, he could see passengers, some dressed like her, in clothes from another century, others in modern jackets and jeans. But every single one of them sat perfectly still, eyes forward, faces pale, as if they were carved from stone. "What happens if I get on?" he asked, raising his voice to be heard. She looked at him with something like pity. "That is the one answer I cannot give. Each journey is different. Each passenger's destination is their own." The wind from the train's approach whipped through the station, rattling the old timbers and scattering the forgotten papers across the floor. The open door was only a few steps away now. Sam felt a strange pull, not just curiosity, but something deeper, like an invisible hand urging him forward. Behind him, the rest of the station seemed to fade. The world outside the door no longer looked like Ravenfield. It looked like a shadowy blur, as though reality itself were slipping away. "Time is running out, Mr. Harper," the woman said softly. Sam took one hesitant step toward the platform. The boards creaked beneath his weight. The train's massive engine loomed beside him, hot steam brushing his skin. He could hear voices inside the carriage now, whispers in dozens of languages, blending into one low hum that seemed to speak directly into his mind. One more step, and he'd be inside. The passengers. Sam hesitated at the train's open doorway, gripping the cold iron handle. The metal felt strangely alive, pulsing faintly beneath his fingers, like it was breathing. He glanced back at the woman. She stood on the platform, watching him without blinking, her parasol tucked neatly under her arm. The whistle sounded again, sharper this time, as if urging him to make his choice. He stepped inside. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the air changed. The warm, damp scent of steam and coal was replaced by something different. A strange mix of salt water, cedarwood, and candle wax. The carriage was dimly lit, its interior lined with dark mahogany panels and brass fixtures that gleamed softly in the flickering light. Passengers filled the seats, but none looked at him. Some wore old-fashioned suits and dresses from the late 1800s. Others wore modern clothes, hoodies, leather jackets, business attire. Yet every single face was pale, every expression blank, as though they had been waiting for centuries. The seats were arranged in pairs along a narrow aisle, but Sam noticed something unsettling. Each seat had a number carved into the wood, and beside it, an empty slot, like a place for a ticket that had yet to be claimed. "Sit," came a voice from the far end of the carriage. Sam turned. At the back of the car stood a man in a black conductor's uniform. His hat was pulled low, shadowing most of his face, but the gleam of his silver watch chain was visible against his dark vest. In his hand, he held an old punch tool, the kind used to clip paper tickets. "I don't have a ticket," Sam said. The conductor's head tilted slightly, as though considering the statement. Then he stepped forward, the sound of his polished shoes tapping against the wooden floor. "No one boards without a ticket, Mr. Harper. You've had yours for a long time." Sam's stomach tightened. "How do you know my name?" The conductor ignored the question and extended his hand. Sam, almost without thinking, reached into his coat pocket and froze. His fingers touched something thin and stiff. When he pulled it out, his breath caught. It was a ticket. Not just any ticket, but one printed on thick, yellowed paper, with his name written in elegant ink. The destination line was blank. At the bottom, in faded letters, was a phrase. "One way only." The conductor took the ticket, inspected it, and clipped the corner with a sharp click. "Car 3. Window seat." He handed it back without looking at Sam again. Sam moved down the aisle, passing rows of passengers who didn't react to his presence. As he sat by the window, he realized the view outside was no longer the station. Instead, dark forests sped past, their twisted trees illuminated by a silver-blue moonlight that didn't seem natural. There was no sign of tracks, no sign of the town. The woman in the vintage dress entered the carriage a moment later, gliding down the aisle until she sat directly across from him. She placed her parasol on her lap and folded her hands neatly. "You made your choice," she said softly. Sam looked out the window, his voice low. "Where are we going?" She gave him a small, knowing smile. "That depends on what you've left behind." The train gave a sudden, jarring lurch forward, and the hum of the wheels deepened into a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The whispers began again, curling around him like smoke, each one carrying fragments of words he almost recognized. Somewhere up ahead, beyond the next carriage, something waited for him. The carriages beyond. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels became hypnotic, but Sam couldn't relax. Every instinct told him that staying in his seat was the safest choice. And yet, the whispers from deeper in the train kept pulling at him, urging him to move. He glanced at the woman across from him. Her eyes were closed now, her face serene, as though she were somewhere far away. For a moment, he wondered if she was asleep, but then her lips moved, forming words so faint he couldn't quite hear them. He leaned forward. "What did you say?" he asked. Her eyes opened, clear and sharp. "Not all passengers here are alive, Mr. Harper. Some are only shadows of what they once were. Remember that before you go looking." A shiver ran through him. He turned his gaze toward the end of the carriage. A narrow door, painted the same dark mahogany as the walls, separated this car from the next. The window in its center was so fogged that he couldn't see through it. The conductor was gone. No one stopped him as he rose and walked down the aisle, passing pale, unmoving passengers. Some sat perfectly upright, hands resting on their knees. Others slouched slightly, but their eyes were always fixed forward, never blinking. He felt their stillness like a weight pressing on his chest. When he reached the door, he hesitated. The whispers were louder now, but they weren't coming from voices in this carriage. They came from beyond. He slid the door open. The next carriage was darker, its lights dimmed to an eerie amber glow. Here, the seats weren't neatly arranged. Some were overturned, others broken entirely, as if something violent had passed through. A cold breeze swirled inside, though there were no open windows. At first, Sam thought this car was empty, until he noticed the figures standing in the aisle. There were 3 of them, motionless, facing away from him. They were dressed in heavy, tattered coats, the fabric stiff with some dark, dried substance. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles, as though their necks couldn't quite hold them upright. "Hello," he tried, his voice low. One of the figures turned. Its face, if it could be called that, was a gray, featureless mask, with only faint indentations where eyes should have been. It tilted its head at him slowly, as if studying something it couldn't understand. Another figure turned, then the third. Now all 3 were facing him, their blank faces twitching slightly, like they were trying to remember how to move. The whispers swelled until they were almost deafening. Sam stepped back, his hand tightening on the doorframe. But before he could retreat, the nearest figure took a step toward him. The sound of its footfall was wrong, a hollow, echoing thud, as if it were walking on wood and stone at the same time. The other 2 followed, their movements jerky but deliberate. And then, without warning, every passenger in the first carriage, the one Sam had just left, turned their heads toward him in perfect unison. Their eyes were wide open now. The ones who follow. Sam's breath quickened as dozens of unmoving passengers from the first carriage stared at him, their heads tilted at that same unnatural angle he'd seen in the faceless figures. Not a sound came from them. No breathing, no shifting in their seats, just the stillness of something that had been waiting too long. The 3 faceless figures in the darkened carriage began to advance, each step accompanied by that hollow, double-layered thud. The whispers in Sam's head grew louder, layering over each other in so many tongues that his thoughts became a blur. He stumbled backward, slamming the door shut between them. The glass panel in the door fogged instantly, and through the mist he saw their shapes still moving forward, slowly pressing against it. Their faceless heads tilted side to side in a rhythm that made his skin crawl. Behind him, the passengers in the first carriage still hadn't moved from their seats, but their eyes, pale, cloudy, and lifeless, never left him. Then one of them smiled. It was an empty, too wide smile that seemed to stretch beyond what a human face should allow. That broke him from his paralysis. He turned and hurried toward the opposite end of the carriage, keeping his eyes away from the passengers. The whispers seemed to shift now, following him, words forming just enough for him to catch fragments. "You shouldn't be here. We see you. Car 7 waits." The door to the next carriage came into view. He gripped the brass handle and shoved it open, desperate to get away from both the staring eyes and the faceless shapes. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted again. This carriage was warm, almost inviting, lit with golden lamps and lined with red velvet seats. A soft piano played from somewhere unseen. The scent of tea and fresh bread filled the air. Passengers here looked normal, alive, even. They smiled, they sipped from porcelain cups, some read books, or chatted quietly. It was so jarringly different from what he'd just seen that he almost laughed in disbelief. But then he noticed something odd. None of them seemed to notice him. He stood in the aisle for several seconds, but no eyes turned toward him. Even when he stepped closer to a table where a young woman was stirring her tea, she didn't look up. Her hands moved, but her face remained fixed in a polite, pleasant expression, like she was caught in the middle of a photograph. Sam leaned closer. "Hello." She didn't answer. Her spoon stirred the tea in an endless, perfect circle. He backed away slowly. At the far end of this carriage, near the door to the next, stood the conductor. His uniform looked even older now, its edges frayed, the gold trim dull and faded. In his hand was that same ticket puncher, glinting faintly in the lamplight. "You keep moving forward," the conductor said without looking at him. Sam swallowed. "What's in car 7? The conductor finally lifted his head, and for the first time Sam saw his eyes, dark, sunken, and cold. "That depends on whether you can make it there before they do." The train gave a sudden, heavy jolt. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed open. The hollow footsteps started again. They were coming. The run to car 7. The sound of those hollow footsteps was closer now, moving with a steady rhythm that made the hairs on the back of Sam's neck stand on end. The warm glow of the velvet-lined carriage suddenly felt suffocating, as if it were nothing more than a painted backdrop hiding something much darker. Passengers in this car still didn't react. They kept sipping their tea, reading their books, and speaking to companions who never blinked. Even when the far door burst open behind Sam with a violent slam, not a single head turned. The faceless ones had entered. Sam didn't dare look back, but he could feel their presence, cold and heavy, like the air before a storm. He shoved his way through the narrow aisle, his shoulder bumping against unmoving passengers who didn't flinch. The conductor stepped aside, letting him pass without another word. As Sam reached the door to the next carriage, the conductor spoke softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Do not let them touch you." Sam yanked the door open and stumbled into the next car. This one was dim, with walls lined in tarnished brass and seats covered in cracked leather. A faint electric buzzing filled the air, and the light flickered above him in irregular patterns. Here, there were fewer passengers. Most of them sat hunched forward, their faces obscured by hats or hair. They didn't speak, but Sam could hear the faint sound of breathing, labored, ragged, as if every inhale was a struggle. He moved quickly down the aisle, trying not to think about what might happen if the faceless ones caught up. The buzzing grew louder, and he realized it wasn't coming from the lights. It was coming from the passengers themselves. A faint, low vibration, almost like the hum of a beehive, pulsed from their bodies. One of them twitched violently as he passed, lifting their head just enough for him to see eyes that were pure black, glossy, and unblinking. Sam quickened his pace. The next door was ahead, but as he reached for the handle, he realized something strange. The brass plaque above, it didn't have a number for the next car. Instead, it was engraved with a single word, 7. His heart pounded. This was it. Car 7. Behind him, the footsteps were almost at the door. He turned the handle, but it didn't move. Locked. The whispers began again, loud and urgent, echoing inside his skull. "Ticket, ticket, ticket." Sam fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the one the conductor had clipped earlier. The letters on it had shifted again. The destination line was still blank, but the ink forming the phrase "one way" only had begun to bleed, as if the words themselves were melting. The door rattled behind him. The faceless ones were here. Sam shoved the ticket into a narrow slot beside the handle. There was a sharp metallic click, and the door creaked open just as a cold, claw-like hand brushed his shoulder. He stumbled through, slamming it shut behind him. The moment the door closed, all sound from the previous cars vanished. The air here was still. Car 7 was nothing like the others. It wasn't even a train carriage anymore. It was a long, narrow hallway of dark stone walls, lit by torches that burned with pale blue flames. The floor beneath him wasn't wood. It was black marble, polished so perfectly he could see his reflection. At the far end of the hall stood a single figure, cloaked in shadow, waiting. The keeper of Car 7. Sam stood frozen in the doorway, the pale blue flames casting flickering light across the long marble corridor. The sound of the train was gone, replaced by a heavy silence that felt unnatural, a silence that seemed to listen. The figure at the far end didn't move. At first, Sam thought it might be another passenger, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized it was taller, broader, its outline sharper than any human silhouette. Its cloak hung to the floor, the fabric so black it seemed to swallow the torchlight. Sam's instinct screamed at him to turn back, but the door behind him was gone. In its place was a smooth wall of dark stone, seamless and cold to the touch. The figure spoke. Its voice was deep and calm, yet carried an echo that made it feel like it came from every direction at once. "Samuel Harper, you have arrived." Sam swallowed hard. Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, and the marble floor didn't so much as echo beneath its feet. Its hood cast a shadow that hid most of its face, but Sam could see a faint gleam, not eyes, exactly, but 2 points of light like distant stars. "I'm the keeper," it said. "I tend a line that runs beyond time, beyond place, beyond choice. You were given a ticket because your journey has reached the crossing." Sam frowned. "Crossing to what?" The keeper tilted its head slightly. "That depends on what you've left undone." From within its cloak, the keeper withdrew an object, Sam's ticket. Only now, the paper had changed. The letters were no longer printed. They were carved deep into the parchment, as if etched with a blade. The destination line still waited, blank. "You may choose where the journey ends," the keeper continued, "or you may let the train choose for you." Sam took a step forward, his voice tight. "And if I choose wrong?" "There is no wrong," the keeper said, "only permanence." The torches along the walls flickered, and images began to ripple across the marble floor. Scenes from Sam's life. He saw his tiny apartment in the city, his desk at the newspaper office, the empty bar stool at his favorite diner. He saw faces, some familiar, some distant, people he'd known, helped, or ignored. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. The Ravenfield station. Only it wasn't empty. It was full of people, dozens of them, standing perfectly still with those pale, lifeless eyes. They were waiting. "For me," Sam whispered. The keeper said nothing, but the answer was clear. Sam's mind raced. "What happens if I go back?" The keeper's faint star-like eyes blinked once. "You cannot go back the same, but you can return changed." "And if I stay?" Sam asked. The keeper slowly extended the ticket toward him. "Then your seat becomes permanent, and the journey continues forever." Sam reached for the ticket, but his hand trembled. Behind the keeper, the blue flames flared higher, and he thought he could see a set of iron doors forming in the wall beyond, their surface carved with hundreds of names. He had seconds to decide. The decision. The keeper's towering form loomed in the shifting torchlight, the pale flames casting long, wavering shadows across the marble floor. Sam's heartbeat echoed in his ears, loud enough that it almost drowned out the keeper's words. The ticket in its black-gloved hand looked almost alive now, the parchment subtly pulsing, the empty destination line glowing faintly, as if it were waiting for his answer. "You are standing at the crossing," the keeper said, its deep voice resonating like distant thunder. "One path returns you to where you began, but it will not be the same life you left. The other keeps you here, and here there is no end." Sam stared at the glowing line on the ticket. "And if I don't decide?" The keeper's head tilted slightly. "Then the train will decide for you." A cold shiver ran through him at the thought. The marble floor beneath his feet shifted again, displaying more fragments of his life. He saw his empty apartment, the unread messages on his phone, the photographs he'd tucked away in a drawer after his parents died. He saw the unfinished manuscript on his laptop, the story he'd never had the courage to complete. Then abruptly the visions changed. He saw the Ravenfield station again, but this time the faceless ones stood at the platform. Their featureless heads turned toward him in perfect unison, even though he was only seeing them in reflection. And behind them, dozens of passengers from the earlier carriages, their pale eyes fixed on him, waiting. The whispers returned, louder than ever. You belong to the line. Stay. Seat permanent. Sam backed away from the images, his pulse spiking. No, he muttered, more to himself than to them. No, I'm not staying. The keeper didn't move. Then you must choose where you will go. You may return to your world, but the door will not open in the place you left it. Sam frowned. What does that mean? Time, the keeper said simply. It does not pass here as it does there. You may return to a moment after you left, or a century later. You cannot know until you step through. The iron doors at the far end of the hall began to open, a deep grinding sound echoing through the stone corridor. Beyond them was a blinding light that made it impossible to see what lay past. The keeper extended the ticket toward him one final time. Mark your destination, Samuel Harper. The choice is yours alone. Sam stared at the glowing blank line. His hand trembled as he took the ticket. The whispers clawed at the edges of his mind, but for the first time since boarding the train, he forced himself to ignore them. He pulled a pen from his pocket, the same one he'd been carrying to take notes for his article, and touched it to the parchment. The glowing line pulsed once, twice, then slowly began to absorb the ink as he wrote a single word. The keeper's star-like eyes narrowed. So you choose. The light from the doors grew brighter, almost searing, and the marble beneath his feet cracked as if the entire place were reacting to his decision. Sam took a deep breath and stepped toward the threshold. And the moment he crossed it, the sound of the train returned. The world that waited. The blinding light faded slowly, like the dimming of a sunrise behind heavy clouds. At first, Sam thought he was still on the train, the faint vibration beneath his feet, the distant hum of wheels. But when his vision cleared, he realized he was standing on a wooden platform. The Ravenfield station. Only not the one he'd left. The building looked cleaner, restored. Fresh paint coated the walls. The windows were whole, and a polished brass clock ticked above the ticket counter. The air smelled of rain and wood polish, and, faintly, of freshly brewed coffee. There were people here, living, breathing people. Some were reading newspapers, others chatting with suitcases at their feet, waiting for trains that hadn't come to Ravenfield in decades. A boy ran past him, laughing, holding a paper kite. Sam's heart pounded. It was the same station, but it was alive again. He stepped toward the edge of the platform and froze. Tracks gleamed in the sunlight, stretching into the distance. At the far end, a modern passenger train waited, its doors open, the low murmur of boarding passengers drifting across the air. "Ow!" Sam whispered. A voice behind him answered. "Welcome home, Mr. Harper." He turned. The woman in the vintage dress stood a few feet away, her parasol resting on her shoulder. She looked exactly as she had on the night he'd boarded the phantom train, not a single hair out of place. But there was something in her eyes now, a warmth. "You made your choice," she said softly. "You wrote your own destination." Sam's pulse quickened. "When am I?" Her smile didn't fade. "That's for you to discover." Something about her tone made his stomach twist. He glanced toward a newspaper stand and picked up the top copy. The date hit him like a punch. August 14th, 2074. 63 years had passed. Everyone he'd known was gone. The apartment, the newspaper office, the people from his life, all of it belonged to another time. His hands trembled as he set the paper back down. Why send me here?" The woman's expression softened, almost pitying. "Because you asked to return. The train only honors the choice, not the comfort of it." Sam's breath caught. "So that's the price." She nodded once. "Every crossing has one." From the corner of his eye, he saw a movement down the platform. 3 men in dark coats stood together, their faces obscured by shadow despite the sunlight. They didn't move toward him, but he knew, instinctively, that they were watching him. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. Your journey on the train is over, Mr. Harper, but the line still runs through you. You may have left it, but it has not left you. Before he could speak, the whistle of the modern train pierced the air. Passengers began boarding in earnest, the station filling with footsteps and voices. When Sam turned back, the woman was gone. Shadows in the future. The whistle faded, replaced by the steady clank of the modern train's doors closing. Sam stood on the platform, frozen between two choices: board the sleek, silver locomotive and see where it took him, or stay here in Ravenfield and try to understand this strange new version of the world. The three men in dark coats still lingered at the far end, unmoving, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the bright August sunlight. Something about the stillness of their posture gnawed at him. They stood like statues, too still, too perfect. Sam stepped toward the ticket counter, hoping to put distance between himself and them. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled warmly as he approached. Good afternoon, sir. Headed somewhere. Sam hesitated, unsure how much he should reveal. I just got here. First time in Ravenfield? She asked. He blinked. You could say that. The woman handed him a glossy pamphlet. The front bore the title Ravenfield Gateway to the Northern Line. Inside were photos of high-speed trains, clean streets, and buildings that looked more like art sculptures than structures. The world had changed far more than he'd imagined in 63 years. As he flipped through the pages, a flicker of movement caught his eye. The three dark-coated figures were gone. A chill ran through him. He scanned the platform, the crowd, the station interior. Nothing. But then, in the reflection of the ticket counter's glass, he saw them. They were closer now, standing directly behind a column, not 20 feet away. Sam spun around, and the space was empty. The clerk's voice pulled him back. Is everything all right, sir? You look like you've seen a ghost. He forced a thin smile. Something like that. He stepped out of the station into the sunlight. The city beyond was both familiar and alien. Streets had the same layout, but the buildings were taller, sleeker, their surfaces shimmering with digital displays. Silent electric vehicles glided past, and drones zipped overhead. People moved quickly, most wearing small, glassy earpieces that pulsed with faint light. As Sam walked, the sense of being watched only grew stronger. Every reflective surface, the side of a car, the glass of a bus stop, the polished walls of a building, seemed to hold fleeting shapes just behind him. At one point, he caught sight of a faint, featureless face in the reflection of a shop window. The moment he turned, it was gone. They followed me. The thought slammed into him like cold water. The faceless ones hadn't been confined to the train. They'd crossed over. He ducked into a narrow alley between two tall buildings, trying to steady his breathing. The hum of the city was distant here, the air cooler in the shade. And then he heard it. That hollow, double-layered thud of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Sam's grip tightened on the pamphlet in his hand. He turned toward the sound, every muscle tensed. At the far end of the alley, standing in the shadow, was one of the dark-coated figures. Its head tilted slowly, as if acknowledging him. The passenger who never left. The air in the alley felt heavier, the sunlight from the street behind him barely cutting through the shadows. Sam's eyes locked on the figure at the far end. It didn't move, didn't speak, but the way its featureless head tilted made his skin crawl. His mind flashed back to the darkened carriage on the train, to the way those same heads had turned toward him in perfect unison. The same wrong stillness. The same silent weight pressing into his thoughts. Who are you? Sam demanded, his voice echoing faintly off the alley walls. The figure didn't answer. It took one step forward, and a hollow, double-layered thud rolled down the alley toward him. The sound was exactly as it had been on the train, as if it were walking across two different surfaces at the same time. Sam's pulse spiked. You shouldn't be here, he said, taking a step back. Another step forward. He caught a faint shift in the air around it, a warping that blurred the edges of the figure's outline. And then the whispering began, soft at first, curling into his ears like smoke. The line still runs through you. You are not released. Seat permanent. Sam clenched his fists. I made my choice. I left. The whispers hissed, overlapping now. No one leaves. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, Sam saw something move beneath the smooth, featureless surface of its face, as if shadows were writhing just under a thin layer of glass. He turned to run, but as he spun toward the street, another figure was there, blocking the exit. This one was closer, the details of its long coat clearer, the stitching frayed, the fabric damp as if it had been soaked and dried dozens of times. The air between them seemed to hum. Sam pressed his back against the wall, glancing from one faceless shape to the other. His breath came faster, his chest tightening. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The nearer figure tilted its head sharply, almost snapping, and the whispers cut through his skull like a blade. "Return." The ground beneath him seemed to shift, the shadows around his feet stretching unnaturally toward the figures. The alley darkened, the edges of the world warping just like the air around the phantom train. Sam fought the urge to let the shadows pull him in. "No," he whispered to himself. "I'm not going back." He shoved past the figure blocking the street, or tried to. For a brief second, his shoulder brushed its coat, and a cold, unlike anything he'd felt before, poured into him. It wasn't just physical. It was as if a part of him had been yanked away. The whispers swelled, furious now. "You belong to the line." Sam stumbled into the sunlight, heart hammering, but when he looked back, the alley was empty. They were gone. But deep down, he knew they weren't finished. The crossing opens. Sam leaned against the side of a building, his chest heaving as he tried to slow his breathing. The sunlight felt thin, fragile, as though it could be swallowed at any moment. People bustled past him, laughing, talking, scrolling on strange glassy devices, completely unaware that the alley behind him had almost become a doorway to somewhere no one should go. He forced himself to move, weaving through the crowd, scanning every face, every reflection. The faceless ones could vanish in an instant. If they wanted him, they didn't have to follow him in the open. He ducked into a cafe on the corner. The scent of fresh coffee and baked bread washed over him, grounding him for the first time since he'd arrived in this future. He ordered something. He didn't even register what, just to have a reason to sit in the back corner, away from the windows. His hands still trembled as he lifted the cup. Think, think. The words of the woman in the vintage dress echoed in his mind. The line still runs through you. She hadn't said it like a curse, more like a fact, something permanent, which meant the faceless ones weren't here by accident. They were here because of him. Half an hour later, Sam felt steady enough to leave. But as soon as he stepped outside, he froze. The air had changed. It was subtle at first, a faint drop in temperature, the sounds of the city muffled, like someone had put a glass dome over the street. The shadows seemed longer, stretching in unnatural directions. And then he saw it. In the middle of the intersection ahead, a dark shimmer had formed, like heat waves, but black, bending the light around it. People walked past without noticing, their footsteps not disturbing the warp space at all. The shimmer pulsed once, twice, and then began to widen. Sam's stomach turned cold. He knew what he was looking at. It was a crossing, the same kind of fracture in reality that had let him board the train at Ravenfield. Only this one was forming here, in the middle of a busy city street. And through it, faint at first, but growing clearer, he could hear the sound of a train's whistle. The faceless ones were opening a way back. Panic surged in him. If they could pull him through in front of all these people, what would stop them from pulling anyone through? He pushed through the crowd, toward the shimmer. The closer he got, the more he could see on the other side. The dim glow of gas lamps, the gleam of brass, the shape of a carriage door standing open. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was the conductor. His black uniform was immaculate, his cap casting a deep shadow over his face. He raised his head slowly, and Sam saw those same sunken, dark eyes as before. The conductor lifted his punch tool and clicked it once, the sound sharp enough to cut through the noise of the street. "Your seat is waiting," the whispers came, clear and cold. The crossing pulsed wider, and Sam could feel the pull starting, a faint tug at the center of his chest, growing stronger with every heartbeat. If he didn't act now, he wouldn't have a choice. The pull of the line. The tug in Sam's chest grew stronger, rhythmic, almost in time with the phantom train's heartbeat. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But if he did, the crossing would stay open, and the faceless ones could drag him back whenever they pleased. He pushed forward through the crowd, muttering apologies as he shoved past strangers who seemed oblivious to the dark shimmer yawning open in the middle of the street. The conductor stood perfectly still in the carriage doorway, his black-gloved hand resting on the frame. The shadow beneath his cap made it impossible to read his expression, but Sam could feel those sunken eyes locked on him. Behind the conductor, dim shapes moved, passengers, seated and silent, their pale eyes glinting in the low light. The whistle blew. The sound wasn't just loud, it vibrated in Sam's bones, rattling his teeth. Around him, the crowd didn't react. A woman passed within inches of the crossing without so much as glancing toward it, her steps cutting through the warped light as though she were walking through smoke. They can't see it, Sam realized. It's only for me, and maybe for whoever the faceless ones wanted next. The shimmer had widened into a doorway now, the edges rippling like dark water. The pull was stronger, not just physical but mental, a compulsion whispering that stepping inside would make everything easier. The conductor lifted his ticket puncher and clicked it twice. A metallic echo rippled through the street. Sam's breath came fast. He scanned the area for something, anything to disrupt the crossing. His eyes landed on a delivery bike chained to a post. Without thinking, he yanked it free, the chain clattering to the pavement. He sprinted toward the shimmer, gripping the frame like a battering ram. As soon as the bike's front wheel hit the threshold, the air screamed. The metal warped, the tires sagging like wax under a flame. The bike dissolved in a black dust that swirled upward and vanished. The conductor didn't move, but something else did. From deep inside the train, a faceless one stepped into view. Its head tilted in that wrong, bird-like way, the smooth surface of its face reflecting the streetlights like wet glass. It stepped to the edge of the carriage, the hollow thud of its footfall echoing through the crossing. The pull on Sam's chest intensified. He knew if it reached him, it wouldn't have to drag him. The crossing itself would swallow him whole. He grabbed a loose metal trash can from the curb and hurled it at the shimmer. The instant it touched the threshold, the black ripples convulsed violently, the whistle cutting short with a metallic shriek. The conductor took a single step forward, his voice low but carrying across the entire street. "You are overdue, Mr. Harper." The pull faltered for a moment, but so did Sam's footing. The warped ground beneath him seemed to slide, nudging him closer to the doorway. And then he saw them. Two more faceless ones stepping through, their long coats dragging against the warped floor of the crossing. They weren't waiting for him to come willingly anymore. They were coming to take him. When the passengers cross, the air around the crossing rippled harder now, each pulse pulling at Sam's chest like an invisible rope. The three faceless ones moved in perfect unison, their hollow, double-layered footsteps slicing through the muffled city noise. This was different from the alley. Back then, they had kept their distance, shadows haunting the edges of his vision. Now they were stepping fully into this world. Sam stumbled back, boots scraping against the warped pavement. His legs felt heavy, like he was wading through water. The first faceless one reached the edge of the crossing, one smooth hand brushing the invisible barrier before sliding through. It stepped onto the asphalt, the sound wrong, not quite solid, as if the street were both there and not there beneath it. The second followed, its head tilting in that unnatural, snapping motion. Its coat dragged along the ground, damp and dark as though fresh from rain. The third stopped in the threshold, half in the train and half in the city, like it was holding the door open for more to come. Sam's mind raced. If they all get through, there's no going back. The pull in his chest intensified, and the whispers started again, but now they weren't just in his head. He could hear them vibrating in the air around him. Seat permanent. No one leaves the line. Return. He backed toward the sidewalk, searching desperately for something heavy, something that could block or collapse the crossing. His eyes landed on a parked construction truck across the street. Its hazard lights blinked lazily, the back loaded with steel pipes. Sam ran. The first faceless one reacted instantly. It moved fast, too fast, crossing the distance between them in seconds. Sam barely managed to grab one of the pipes from the truck bed before it was on him. The smooth, pale surface of its face reflected his own panicked expression as it reached for him. The touch didn't land. Instead, the pipe came down hard against its shoulder. The sound wasn't flesh and bone-breaking. It was like shattering porcelain. A jagged crack spread across its featureless face, and a hiss escaped from within, cold and sharp like escaping steam. The thing recoiled, stumbling back toward the crossing. The second one lunged, but Sam swung the pipe again, catching in the side. This time, the coat tore, and underneath was nothing but shifting darkness, writhing like smoke caught in a jar. He turned toward the shimmer. The conductor was still in the carriage doorway, his eyes locked on Sam. The third faceless one had stepped aside, leaving the threshold wide open. The pull surged again, nearly dragging him forward. The pipes in the truck rattled violently, drawn toward the crossing like magnets. Sam made a split-second choice. He heaved the pipe in his hands straight into the center of the shimmer. The effect was immediate. The doorway spasmed violently, the black ripples folding in on themselves. The whistle screamed, a sound of pure fury, as the edges collapsed inward. The faceless ones nearest the crossing froze, their bodies twisting unnaturally as the warped space yanked them backward. The cracked one let out a sound that was almost a roar before it was pulled inside. Sam staggered back, shielding his eyes as the shimmer snapped shut with a blast of cold air. The street went still. The people around him blinked, confused, as though nothing unusual had happened. A man carrying groceries muttered about weird weather, stepping around him without a second glance. Sam stood there, shaking, the bent steel pipe still in his hands. He'd won for now, but deep down, he knew the line wasn't finished with him. The archivist. Sam didn't go home that night. He didn't even know if home existed for him anymore. Not in this year. Not in this world that had sprinted 63 years ahead without him. Instead, he walked. The city around him glowed with strange lights, signs that shifted like liquid, and vehicles that moved almost silently. Yet all of it felt thinner somehow, as if the reality here was stretched, and the wrong pull of the line could split it open again at any moment. By dawn, he had made up his mind. If the train could find him here, he needed to know how to stop it. The woman in the vintage dress had spoken of the line as something ancient, something inevitable, but she had also implied that knowledge existed. Somewhere, someone had to know its rules, and if he could find the rules, maybe he could break them. It took 2 days of asking careful questions in cafes, street markets, and transit hubs before he heard a name: the archivist. Whispers described them as a historian of the unseen rails, someone who collected stories and relics of people who had vanished without explanation. The kind of person who believed in things most dismissed as superstition, but whose warnings had a way of coming true. Finding them wasn't easy. The address he was given led to the basement of a crumbling library at the edge of the city, its exterior overshadowed by sleek towers. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and damp stone. Dust motes swirled in the thin beams of light slipping through high windows. He followed the signs to the basement. Those signs was generous. They were small carvings in the wood, almost hidden, a brass compass pointing down, a symbol of a lantern, a tiny engraved rail track. At the bottom of a narrow staircase, Sam found a heavy iron door. He knocked. After a long pause, a sliding panel scraped open, revealing a single gray eye studying him. "You're late," a voice said. Sam froze. "What?" The panel snapped shut, locks clanked, and the door opened with a deep groan. The person standing there was small, wiry, dressed in a long coat covered in patches of different fabrics. Their hair was white, but their movements were quick, sharp. "Get in," the archivist said. The room beyond was like stepping into another world. Shelves crammed with books, old timetables, maps, ticket stubs, and rusted train parts filled every wall. Lanterns of different eras hung from the ceiling, some electric, some gas. The archivist sat behind a desk buried in papers. You've written it. Sam's throat tightened. The train. The line. The archivist corrected. A thread through every place and every time. Most only hear its whistle once. And if they board, they don't return. Their eyes narrowed. But you did. That's not supposed to happen. Sam leaned forward. It's trying to take me back. 3 of whatever they are have crossed over already. I stopped them, but the archivist's hand shot up. Faceless ones. Stewards of the permanent seats. If they've crossed into your world, the line is thinning. More can follow. Sam's pulse spiked. How do I cut the line? The archivist's gaze sharpened. You can't cut it. You can only sever yourself from it. And that's worse. Worse how? The archivist leaned back, shadows deepening in their face. Because to sever yourself, you must give the line something else to hold. Sam frowned. What does that mean? The archivist tapped a yellowed ticket stub on the desk. A name. A life. A person. In exchange for yours. Sam felt the weight of the words sink into him. You mean, I'd have to put someone else in my place? The archivist didn't blink. That's the only way it lets go. If you want, in part 17, I can make Sam wrestle with the morality of this choice, and then discover that the line may already have chosen a replacement without his consent. Do you want me to continue? Вы сказали. 17. Chub сказал. All right, here's a long and detailed part 17 of the story. Part 17, the replacement. The archivist's words echoed in Sam's head long after they stopped speaking. A name. A life. A person. He stared at the yellowed ticket stub between them, its faded ink barely visible. It looked so small, so harmless, and yet the weight of it was crushing. You're telling me, Sam said slowly, that the only way to be free is to hand the line someone else? Like some living ticket exchange. The archivist folded their hands on the desk. Not hand. Offer. It will not take anyone you name unless the line accepts the claim. Sam shook his head. That's not better. It is survival, the archivist said flatly. You are marked. The longer you resist, the thinner the boundary becomes, and the more it will bleed into your world. How many will vanish before you decide you've had enough? The words were sharp, meant to wound. They did. Sam's chest tightened with the memory of the crossing in the street, of the faceless ones stepping into the city. If the shimmer had been wider, if more had come through, he stood abruptly, pacing the cramped space. There has to be another way. Can't I destroy the ticket? Burn it, tear it, anything? The archivist's expression didn't change. You can burn paper. You cannot burn a promise. The ticket is only the record. The agreement is carved into the line itself. Sam stopped pacing, feeling suddenly cold. What if I don't choose anyone? The archivist leaned forward, their voice lowering. Then the line will choose for you, and it will not be gentle. That night, Sam left the library with more weight on his shoulders than when he entered. The streets felt narrower, the shadows longer. He tried to distract himself, sat in a diner, ate food that tasted like nothing, listened to snippets of conversation that were all about things he didn't understand. But it was impossible to ignore the pull in his chest, faint but constant, like the train's whistle on the horizon. By the time he stepped outside again, the city had fallen into a deep, quiet night. The neon glow painted the wet pavement in fractured colors. That's when he saw her. A young woman stood across the street, watching him, not with the hollow stillness of the faceless ones. She looked alive, but there was something in her expression that made his stomach twist. Recognition. She stepped closer, the streetlight catching her face. She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair pulled back and a worn leather satchel over her shoulder. You're Sam Harper, she said. He froze. How do you know that? Her gaze didn't waver. Because I've seen you. On the train. The words hit like ice water. That's impossible, he said, though his voice betrayed him. She shook her head. I wasn't a passenger. Not yet. I saw you through the window when it stopped near my house. You looked right at me. And then, the next day, I started hearing the whistle. Sam's pulse spiked. When was this? 2 nights ago, she said softly. 2 nights ago, the night the faceless ones first appeared in the city. The truth crashed down on him like a hammer. He didn't need to choose a replacement. The line had already chosen one. Bait on the line. The night air suddenly felt thinner, as if every breath Sam took was being stolen from somewhere else. The young woman stood in the halo of the streetlight, her dark eyes locked on him, unblinking. "You've been marked," he said before he could stop himself. Her brow furrowed. "Marked?" Sam stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "You hear the whistle. You've seen the train. That means it's already." The sound cut through his words like a blade. A whistle. Faint, distant, but enough to freeze both of them in place. The girl's face went pale. "That's it. That's the sound I've been hearing." Sam glanced around, but the street was empty, too empty. The hum of the city had faded. The glow of neon signs seemed dimmer, and shadows stretched far beyond their natural reach. He knew this feeling. The line was pressing close. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "If you see anything, anyone without a face, you run. Don't look back." Her voice shook. Why would there be? Movement at the far end of the street silenced her. 3 figures stepped into view. Long coats. Smooth, featureless faces. They didn't rush. They didn't have to. The girl took a step back. "What are they?" Sam's voice was tight. "Collectors. They're here for you." One of the faceless ones tilted its head toward him, and the whispers hit instantly, crawling into his skull. "We offer exchange. Leave her. Your seat remains yours." Sam's stomach churned. This was exactly what the archivist had warned him about. The line had given him a way out, a replacement, and all he had to do was nothing. But the girl's eyes were wide with terror, and in that moment, she wasn't just a name on a ticket. She was a person. The collectors closed in, their footsteps echoing in that unnatural, double-layered rhythm. The pull of the crossing began behind them, a shimmer of warped air slowly widening in the middle of the street. The girl clutched his arm. "What's happening?" Sam made his choice in a heartbeat. "We run." They bolted, shoes slapping against wet pavement. The pull from the crossing grew stronger with every step, but they stayed just ahead of it. Sam knew the faceless ones could close the gap at any moment. They were toying with him, waiting to see if he'd falter. They darted into a narrow side street, weaving between dumpsters and loading docks. Sam's heart pounded as he scanned for somewhere, anywhere, to hide. At the far end, he spotted an old subway entrance, its metal gate rusted and half open. "In there," he hissed. They squeezed through, descending into the damp, echoing tunnel. The smell of rust and stale air wrapped around them. Only when they reached the bottom did Sam risk looking back. The street above was empty, but he knew they weren't safe. The collectors didn't give up, not until the seat was filled. Beneath the city, the subway tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, its cold air tasting faintly of iron. The dim emergency lights along the walls flickered, bathing the cracked tiles in sickly yellow pulses. Sam's footsteps echoed in the silence, too loud, too exposed. The girl stayed close behind him, clutching the strap of her satchel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Every few seconds, she glanced over her shoulder as if expecting the faceless ones to step out of the shadows. "They can't come down here, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sam didn't answer. He'd learned the hard way that the line could open anywhere, and tunnels like these, forgotten and quiet, were perfect places for it to bleed through. They reached the old platform, long abandoned, the tracks coated in a thin layer of dust. Rusted benches sat along the wall, and faded advertisements clung to the tiles like peeling scabs. That's when Sam noticed it. The air here wasn't just cold, it was wrong. It carried the faint hum he'd felt inside the train, that low vibration beneath his ribs. The girl felt it too. She rubbed her arms, shivering despite the stillness. He scanned the platform. Something about the far end made his skin crawl. The shadows, they were too deep, almost liquid. Then the whistle came. Not distant this time. Close. The girl stiffened. "It's here." Sam grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the stairs, but the shadows at the far end rippled like disturbed water. Shapes began to form, outlines of a doorway, framed in a faint golden light that didn't belong in this place. The crossing was opening. The girl's breath came fast. "What is that?" Sam's voice was tight. "The way to the train." The platform trembled slightly as the whistle blew again, longer this time. Out of the golden light, the familiar shape of a carriage door appeared, its brass edges gleaming. Behind it, dim gas lamps lit rows of motionless passengers. And then he saw them, the faceless ones stepping out onto the platform. 3-0 for this time. The girl froze, backing into the wall. Sam put himself between her and them, his hands curling into fists. One of the collectors tilted its head toward him, the smooth surface of its face reflecting the flickering platform lights. The whispers filled the air again, louder than before. You are late. Seat waiting. Exchange now. The fourth collector stepped closer to the girl, its long coat whispering against the floor. Sam lunged, grabbing an old length of metal pipe from beside the tracks. The nearest faceless one reached for him, and Sam swung. The impact cracked its featureless surface, a hiss of cold vapor escaping as it staggered back. But even as it fell, another step forward. The crossing pulsed brighter, and Sam felt the pull start again, stronger than in the street. If it kept widening, the train could take both of them without effort. He had seconds to act. The last crossing. The pull was like a storm surge now, invisible hands dragging Sam toward the open carriage door. The whistle split the air, echoing through the tunnel like the cry of something ancient and hungry. The girl clung to the wall, her eyes wide, watching the four faceless ones close in. Their movements were slow but certain, like predators savoring the hunt. Sam's mind raced. He knew from the crossing in the street that destroying the structure of the opening could collapse it, but this one was wider, more stable. He'd have to hit it from inside. The thought made his stomach twist. Inside the crossing meant inside the train. And inside the train, the line could close behind him. The whispers slid into his mind again, slick and cold. Step through, Mr. Harper. Leave her. Keep your seat. He gripped the rusted pipe tighter. Not happening. The nearest collector lunged. Sam sidestepped, slamming the pipe into its shoulder. The impact cracked its smooth face, but the thing barely flinched. Another reached for the girl, and Sam threw himself between them, shoving her hard toward the stairs. Go! Don't stop, he shouted. She hesitated, but the look in his eyes told her not to argue. She ran, her footsteps echoing up the concrete steps. The faceless ones didn't follow her. They all turned back toward him. Is you the line wants? Sam took a deep breath and charged straight at the crossing. The golden light washed over him, the warmth of it almost comforting. And that was the most dangerous part. It wanted him to step in willingly. He didn't. Instead, at the last second, he swung the pipe hard into the brass frame of the doorway. The sound was like striking a massive bell. The entire crossing shuddered, the golden light flaring white, then flickering violently. The conductor appeared in the doorway, his sunken eyes locking on Sam. His voice was low but cut through the roar of collapsing air. You can't sever the line, Mr. Harper. Sam gritted his teeth. Maybe not, but I can close this door. He swung again, and again, each strike splintering the brass. The frame began to twist in on itself, the light warping until it was nothing but a jagged tear in the air. The whistle screamed, a sound of rage, not warning. The pull intensified, dragging him toward the narrowing gap. The faceless ones lunged, hands outstretched. For a moment, he thought they'd take him with it. And then, the light snapped out. The tunnel went dark and silent, the only sound his ragged breathing. When his eyes adjusted, the platform was empty. The collectors were gone. The crossing was gone. He stumbled to the stairs, forcing his legs to climb. When he emerged onto the street, dawn was breaking, pale light spilling across the wet pavement. The girl stood at the corner, waiting, her arms wrapped around herself. You made it, she whispered. He nodded, too exhausted to speak. The pull in his chest was gone. For the first time since he'd stepped off the train into this future, the air felt like his own. But as they walked away together, Sam knew one thing for certain. He hadn't destroyed the line. He just made it skip his stop. For now.